So next we're going to talk about the Territorial Sea Plan Part 4, which discusses uses of the seafloor. We're going to look, the section addresses fiber optic communication cables currently routed through our territorial
That's what I was going to use this last half hour for.
that may occur in the future. Our speaker today is Scott McMullen. He is coming to us from the Oregon Fishermen's Cable Committee. He also was previously on OPAC and the chair committee here, so I'm sure it'll be quite educational. And he's getting settled and I think downloading PowerPoint. So if you can give us a few minutes, that would be great.
In case anybody needs more treats, there's cookies over there on the counter.
Probably yes. Cut it a little close.
Yeah. I'm supposed to have another 20 minutes.
This is as good as a mile.
Are you ready, sir?
I am, Chair.
Well, we're ready for you. I introduced you. I think you
That
might
shit
have
over
been
here.
talking to Andy at the time. We introduced you in the session, discussing with us uses of the seafloor and
Blow my
Territorial Sea
brain.
Plan Part 4. We're looking forward to hearing. Thank you, Scott, for being here and for driving all this meeting.
Thank you, Chair Carter and members of OPAC. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. I really do promise to get help for my OPAC addiction. I think that there probably is a way to recover from this. I'm still working on it. I did not plan to attend this meeting, but actually Andy persuaded me that I would be a better speaker on this topic. And I have had quite a bit of experience, although I wasn't involved with the development of Part 4 that occurred in 2000. And while we were beginning to work on submarine cable issues starting in 1998, I wasn't involved with OPAC. In fact, I became an OPAC member just after TSP Part 4 was adopted. And I think perhaps because of my 11th hour involvement to try to make one slight change to the TSP Part 4 amendment. So TSP Part 4 is all about cables and pipelines. It isn't specific to telecommunications cables, but it's cables and pipelines, so linear installations on the seabed. The background, Andy prepared the PowerPoint for me, so I take no credit for that. The elements of the power system, submarine power cable system, don't know a lot about that. I attended the OREC, Oregon Renewable Energy Conference, last couple days in Portland. Learned a little bit more. Essentially, you have a wind or wave energy device field. It might be a single device or it might be a couple, but typically they collect at a aggregation point, and then with feeder cables, and then a single cable would go back to shore carrying the power. before there was a TSP Part 4, I think it's fair to say there was a real lack of communication. I think part of the reason the Oregon Fishermen's Cable Committee developed was because in years prior to TSP Part 4, AT&T installed some cables down in Bandon area. And they sent an individual out to come and talk to the fishing industry. And the information they got back from the fishing industry was, this is a really important spot right where you're headed. And please keep your cables as close together as possible or avoid this area. And I think if you ask the fishermen in Coos Bay, they'd say that sort of fell on deaf ears. There really wasn't any noticeable change to the route, although the cable company might have argued that they did make it a little closer together. But what happened with the way AT&T operated in those days, they've changed now, but they would put their cable in, they'd send a fellow out to report to the fleet and say, here's our cables, please don't fish here anymore. They'd hand out charts. The charts would often have a pink buffer zone along the cable, 1 mile north, 1 mile south of the cable. And that buffer zone was a no-go area. You were expected to pick up your gear and either pick it up all the way to the surface and run across, or pick it up off the seabed and fly it across and down. Well, if you know anything about drag fishing, you're accumulating fish as you go. You really, that's not a very efficient way to fish, to have to pick up your gear and jump over, particularly an area that would be 2 miles wide, 1 mile north and 1 mile south of an individual cable. So the fishermen in Coos Bay, I think, were very loud and vocal in their complaints. Unfortunately, it was after the fact. It was after the cable was put in. And I think the burning in their ears of the fishermen from Coos Bay within the Department of State Lands is part of the reason things have changed in Oregon, both with the formation of cable committees and with TSP Part 4. So it wasn't a good system before this happened. Go to the next slide. And I'll just say one of the reasons that cable companies are so concerned about fishing is worldwide, on a global scale, commercial fishermen are really the biggest cause of disruption of cables, the biggest causal factor in interruption of traffic. And it's usually by trawlers that snag a cable and part it. Other parts of the globe, in South China Sea, they have a fishery called stone net fishing, where they use a big heavy weight. They drop it into the mud, which in the South China Sea is very soft, and so it penetrates a long ways down into the mud, and then they tow in a circle, sort of filtering the fish out of the mud at this real soupy bottom layer. The bottom isn't like our bottom here. It's sort of like pudding for the first several meters. So anyway, but that fishery is known to damage a lot of cables as well. And so rightly, cable owners are very concerned about fishing, and their solution, kind of on a global scale, is we don't allow fishing over cables. We make sure that if someone hits a cable, we make it hurt. We make penalties that are severe, both through the legal means available, lawsuits, but even, and in a lot of cases, there's laws that can be used to prosecute people who damage cables. In the United States right now, there is still a legal barrier to damaging a cable, that you can be imprisoned for such a thing. So, so that was sort of the way that they enforced in the old days, was they made it very, very, they made an example out of anybody that damaged a cable. After that, we came along and we decided that the key to compliance wasn't carrying a big stick and saying, no, you can't go here, but we thought a much better program would be cooperation, and trying to make fishermen understand where the real risks are and avoid the risk spots and not have to avoid the whole cable. So TSP Part 4 sort of recognizes the effort that we had in 1998 in our development of a agreement with the first cable company to come in since the early AT&T cables in the mid-90s. And so TSP Part 4 talks about some of these things: protect fishing uses, avoid conflicts, try to reduce the adverse effects, and mitigate where you can't do anything else. It also requires that there's direct communication between the applicant of a TSP Part 4 project, a communication cable, or a cable or a pipeline, and the fishing industry. The regulatory review process handled at DSL. They coordinate the activity with the other agencies, so the other agencies like Parks and Fish and Wildlife all work through and provide comments back to DSL. And I believe under the framework of TSP Part 4, a submarine cable owner has to submit the application a minimum of 6 months in advance of any work. Although there is one exception at the direction of the Director of the Department of State Lands. That 6-month period, or 180 days, can be waived in the case where you have an existing cable landing station. You've been through it all before, the issues are already known, the issues are addressed. You could actually have an accelerated process in those cases where you're going into a place you've already been. There is a public hearing process. Typically, there isn't a lot of interest. I think largely because the process sort of works to eliminate conflict. We don't have the situation where we have people coming to hearings to protest or to say, no, don't do this. It's just by addressing the issues in advance, it really has made for a much smoother process. And I think Oregon is a leader in this, and the way that sort of the understood way to get a cable project going in Oregon is you meet with the fishing industry, and the state will have a pre-application submittal meeting where they get the different stakeholders in the room, the different agencies in the room, and they say, here's what we'll expect of you when you submit your application. So they know before they even start, Parks is going to want these issues addressed. Fish and Game is going to want these things. And the fishing industry, often we're invited to that meeting, we say here's what we would expect. And so when the applicant goes to submit his application, typically all those things are addressed in the application packet. And commonly in Oregon, that includes a copy of an agreement with an entity, and that's been us because we're the kind of the go-to entity for working with the fishing industry, although it doesn't have to be us. It could, for example, the Wave Energy test bed at Newport, it might well be that the Fine Group becomes the entity that has the fishing agreement with PAC Wave test bed. So basically in Oregon, because the fishing industry goes hand in hand with the applicant to the hearing, it really it makes it quite easy for regulators to say, wow, this is great, everybody's on the same page, everyone's happy. And I think it works so well in Oregon that it's gained a reputation. About a year and a half ago, there was a delegation from Hawaii that came to Oregon, and they said there were many regulators in natural resources in Hawaii came, and they got a tour of some of the facilities. I'm sure Patty's aware of that, and Kelly from SL. The thing they wanted to hear was how to do it, because they heard from numerous people in the cable industry. Go to Oregon, they have permitting really figured out. It's not a super long process, it's efficient, it addresses all the issues, but you don't get strung out for a long, long time. So for most of these kind of projects, time to getting a project permitted is the big driver. Dollars isn't as big a factor as time. Most of these things want to get their cable built and get it operational. And if you saw the demand curve for bandwidth on Trans-Pacific or Oregon to Alaska traffic, it's the hockey stick. You know, it's just ramping on a quite vertical pitch. So because there's this demand, they want to get cables permitted fast. Gina, question?
On that point that you're making, can you give a perspective on the magnitude of like how many cables are put in Oregon or other seabed structures, and what's kind of the future demand? I think some people have a perception that, well, with satellites, we've been using cables anymore. So can you clarify that?
Absolutely, thank you. Gina.
Can I pause you for just 1 second? I'm hitting a disk full, so I need to erase a file, and then we can continue. Otherwise, I won't get it on the meeting recording.